Today I'm back with another brewing video, and no, it's not a cider, it's not a beer, it's my first mead. So stay tuned, see how it's done. Okay, like I said, this is my first mead, so it's gonna kind of be a how-to video, but more of a me just experimenting, trying it out. So I have all my things over here that I need to sanitize. I've got my carboy. It's just a glass apple juice container basically that I got from Earth Fare, but I'm gonna use that to ferment the mead in. I've got all my stuff over here I need to sanitize, and my glass jug here is filled with sanitizer right now because it was the first thing I was going to sanitize. And then my ingredients are water, honey, and yeast. And then I'm also going to make a little nutrient tea that I'm going to use to help the yeast along and to help complement the honey. And it's just going to be raisins and a black tea bag. So let's get started on all this. We're actually going to start the tea first. Then we're going to sanitize everything, get the yeast started rehydrating, and then we'll make our mead. To start with this tea, I'm not going to worry about sanitizing anything because this is going to be boiled. So I've got a little bit of water in the pot there. I'm going to take about a handful of these. It's about half the box of raisins. Maybe a couple more. There we go. We take about half the box of raisins, and then I'm just going to chop them up a little bit because that will help get to all those nutrients that are inside these raisins. So when we get our water boiling, that will help to pull those nutrients out, because otherwise you're just getting what's on the outside of the raisin, and we want the stuff that's inside. We're going to make sure these are at least all chopped in half. They do get kind of sticky. There we go. That should be good enough. So then we're going to add these to our water right here. Dump them on in there. We'll take our tea bag, put it in here, and turn the heat on and wait for that to start boiling. Now when it started to boil, we just want to take that off the heat, set a timer for 15 minutes, and let it steep. While the tea is steeping, we're going to go ahead and get our cup that I sanitized. I just finished sanitizing it. And we're gonna start rehydrating our yeast. So I bought, instead of going and getting filtered water and stuff, I just got a gallon of spring water. It was $1 and some change. And a full gallon of water is not gonna fit in this because we're also adding the honey and that little bit of tea. So I'm gonna use a little bit of this water. To get our yeast started. Now this is the same yeast that I used for the cider, and I'm going to use the rest of it in this. This was the other project, the other experiment that I had planned. I'm just going to dump the rest of that yeast in there. It's about half a package, which is good for 5 gallons. So this would be, half of it would be good for 2.5. I'm just going to mix that up just a little bit. Just make sure the little bits on the side get back down in there. Almost got it all. You'll notice when you start mixing it, I'll splash some out. These little particles of yeast will get up on the side of the cup. So I try to get those, just wash them back down in there as best I can. If there are a couple, it's fine. You just want to get most of that yeast, as much of that yeast as you can. Okay, there we go, muddy water. Just gonna set that to the side. I want to take a minute to talk about the honey. It's the main ingredient in what we're making, and so you want it to be a good honey. However, honey is expensive, and since this is my first batch, I didn't want to go out and spend $20 or $30 on 3 pounds of honey and make my first batch of mead and either mess it up and waste that money, or make this and realize I'm not a fan of mead. So I just went to Walmart and I got a 3 pound container of honey it was a little over $10. Not that bad. It may not make the best mead in the world, but it will be mead, and I will finally get to try mead because I've never actually tried mead before. After this, I'll experiment with other honey. I've got a few places local to here that I want to try to get some honey from to try it out, try some flavored meads, which are actually called melomels, and just experiment more with mead. So that's kind of what I want to do in the future, but with this batch, I'm just starting off with something easy and cheap. Now that the tea has finished steeping, and don't worry, I took my honey and I put it in warm water in the sink so it can get a little bit easier to, when you warm it up, it flows a little bit better. Anyway, it's sitting back there. It'll be ready in just a few minutes. But now that the tea is done steeping, we want to strain it off, and I have a sanitized cup here. This was boiled, so the pot itself didn't need to be sanitized, but everything after that needs to be sanitized. So I sanitized this measuring cup and the strainer. I'm just gonna slowly pour my tea into this cup. Now this tea is still gonna be very hot, and we can't put anything too hot into or we can, but if you put anything too hot into your, what's gonna become your mead, it's gonna be your must. Anything too hot into that, it will kill the yeast. So we want to let our tea cool down some, and it's not too hot, but it is a little warm, and I can still see steam coming off of it. So I'm just gonna put this in the fridge for just a few minutes, just to give it a quick cool. All right, so I have my sanitized, I can really smell that yeast over here. It's hydrating well, but I have my sanitized glass carboy that I'm gonna put my mead in, and I have my honey that I've let warm up just a little bit in the sink with hot water. So I'm gonna pull get this opened up. This does not want to come off for some silly reason. There we go. Okay. We'll put this top back on to help put it in here better. I'm not going to use the funnel for the honey because I've got this little squeeze top, so I can easily just squeeze that right into here. And this may take a little while because it's, even with the squeeze top and even with it being warm, it's coming out a little slow. You'll also notice when you sanitize your carboy or whatever you're gonna use as your fermenter, with the star sand, you get all these bubbles. Don't worry about rinsing that out. That's actually good for your fermentation. It will give I think it gives your yeast a little bit of nutrient too, or something. I know it's good for your fermentation. So don't worry about rinsing it out. In fact, if you do rinse those out, you're kind of negating the sanitization process altogether. Now, I'm not sure if I mentioned how much honey I'm using, but for a 1 gallon batch, I've seen that it's typically about 3 gallons of honey. But it really matters. What really matters is the alcohol content that you want, because The honey is just the sugar. It's going to flavor it too, but the honey is what your yeast is going to eat. So depending on how much sugar you have in there, you could end up with a higher alcohol content at the end. And it could also give you a sweeter product at the end, because if you let your yeast has a certain tolerance. For instance, the one I'm using has a tolerance of 14%, which means when the mead gets to a 14% alcohol level, the yeast is just gonna die. It's gonna start dying off. So it shouldn't get above 14%. Some people might get higher. Typically, I think it's gonna be lower than that, because that 14% is under perfect conditions. So when it gets to 14%, your yeast is gonna start dying off. And if you still have sugar left in there that the yeast has not eaten, you're going to have a sweeter final product. So if you want it to be sweeter, you could have more than 3 gallons of honey. I mean, that's one possible way to do it. But typically, the recipes that I've seen use about 3 gallons of honey. So that's what I'm using here. And we just about have it all in there now. This is actually coming out really well. So if you do end up having honey stick to your container, and you want to get of course you want to get all the honey out, but if you have some that just will not come out, that hot tea that we just made, take a little bit of that, swirl it around in the bottle. I know I said you don't want anything too hot to get into your mix, but a tiny bit of that you put in here, it's gonna cool off fast enough, especially with what we're gonna do. Because we're gonna have to shake all this up to mix up the honey, to aerate it. So if you use a tiny bit of that hot tea to wash out the last bit of honey, it'll be just fine. All right, we're down to almost the end. Just about there. One more good squeeze, I think, and we'll be good. And there it goes. Let's get those last few drops in there. All right. It looks good. There we go. So now we've got our honey in. So we're gonna go ahead and take some of this water. And now we will use the funnel, because our water jug does not have a small spout on it. And we're gonna fill this up about halfway. There we go. So now, I'm gonna get our bong here, sanitize the bong, because this will make it easier. Instead of having to cover the entire top of this glass carboy, I can just cover one little hole. I'm gonna shake this up a lot. Gotta get all that honey on the bottom. See, it's still stuck on there. Gotta get all that honey and not let it drip out. All that honey mixed up. And as with the cider, it's helping to get a lot of good oxygen in there, so that when the yeast starts fermenting, it has good oxygen to help it. After it starts fermenting, you don't want any more oxygen to get in, because that can cause problems. So there we go. That's looking pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good. All right, so we'll take our bung back out and drop it back in there. So the tea is still warm to the touch. It doesn't feel hot, and it has no steam coming off of it. So I'm gonna say it's cool enough to use. We're gonna put our funnel back in here, cool enough not to kill the yeast. We're gonna hope, at least. I'm gonna pour this tea right in. And we'll shake it up again too. So that can also help. Plus we're about to add this room temperature water to top it off, which will also help to cool it down. So we're gonna get it almost to where we want it. We wanna leave a decent amount of headspace in here because we don't want this to overflow. So we're gonna right now leave that much decent amount of headspace because after we add the yeast, we might add a little bit more water. So now we're gonna grab our bung again and just give this one more quick shake just to mix in the tea. There we go. That should be good. And it doesn't feel overly warm, so I think we're gonna be good. We're gonna pull our bung out, put our funnel back in, and now we're gonna add the yeast. In the last video, I mentioned taking your hydrometer reading, which I'm gonna do that as well. I said you can do it before or adding your yeast. Now, with this, I'm gonna add a little bit more water after I add my yeast. I can already tell because I want it to come up a little bit higher. So I'm gonna go ahead and add my yeast, add a little bit more water, then I'll take my hydrometer reading. And I actually have a tube this time, so we're gonna do it a little bit different. But let's go ahead, we're gonna pitch the yeast. Just gonna pour that right in my funnel. Get all that good yeastiness in there. I actually have a little bit that didn't want to come out. I should have shook it before. I'm going to put a little bit more water in here just to get the rest of that out. There we go. And then we're going to go ahead and add the rest of our water and bring it up to about right there. Looks good. I would rather err on the side of caution and leave too much headspace than to have this thing overflow in my closet. Just to be honest with you. So I've got this measuring tube, a hydrometer tube that I've sanitized, and I have my hydrometer here. So I also have, this is the inner part of my auto siphon that I've also sanitized. And I'm going to use it to attempt to get a sample of this out. And I may end up just pouring it into my testing tube here, but I'm going to attempt. There we go. This might take a while. This is a big tube and it's only pulling out a small amount. Actually, let's stick that in there and give it a little stir while it's in there. Okay. And since I sanitized my tube here, I can take what I'm putting in here and pour it right back in to the carboy. So I'm not wasting anything. There we go, that should be enough to get a reading. Get a good reading. So we've got our sanitized hydrometer here. I'm just gonna drop this down in there. Kind of twirl it a little bit to get some of the bubbles around it to dissipate. This is hovering around I wanna say 1.18. Yeah, around 1.18. That's a lot of sugar. A lot of sugar there. 1.18 is our initial original gravity. So we're gonna take this and just pour it right back in. Just like that. And I'm gonna tell you, if you were to take a sample, oh, that smells sweet. It's just honey. If you were to take a sample of this right now, just take a taste of it, it would just taste like sugar, straight up honey. So, last step, we're gonna put in our bung, our rubber air stopper, and actually I'm gonna dry the outside of this off a little bit. Make it, hopefully, stay in a little bit better. Don't want this thing to pop out. There we go. And then we have our airlock, which we have sanitized, and it's got some of the sanitizer liquid in there, which is really good to use for your liquid, because you're supposed to add, there are 2 lines on here, and you're supposed to add liquid up to those lines. Some people will use vodka. Most people just use water. Sanitizer water is just fine. Okay, make sure the top is on. The top has little tiny holes to let air out, but keep bugs from getting in. So we'll slide that right down there in the hole. And now we just put it up in the closet and let it sit. I'll check on this I'll probably check on it later today, make sure it starts fermenting, and then it'll take a while. I think it's about 3 months before it's really ready to drink. But I may give it a month and then rack it off to something else. I'll check it, and if I do, I'll come back and show it to you guys and let you see it then. So until then, I'm gonna take this, put it in the closet, and we'll just let it do its thing. So I'll talk to you guys.